My word. A panel game devised by Tony Schreier and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words. And here's your chairman, Jack Longland.
We go straight into the first round, which tests their vocabularies. For 2 marks, what's the dictionary meaning of the following words? We begin with Denis Norden. And Denis, your word is recherché.
Well, the words in this round always are.
Yes.
Recherché.
That's a good negative definition.
Something recherché is far out in the negative sense. It's been sought for too long.
Yes, I think that's absolutely dead right, and 2 marks. It's a somewhat dated adjective, I think, isn't it, Dennis? I mean, it has a sort of Victorian ring about it.
It would be, it hasn't. I would think that you could run a boutique called Recherché.
That you could probably manage, yeah. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, schizophrenic.
Schizophrenic. Schizo means split.
Yes.
And phrenic means mind. It's something. It's somebody. Well, it's an adjective meaning with a split mind.
Yes.
Which implies that the person with schizophrenia can be really 2 people like all of us.
Yes, that doesn't help the doctors to diagnose.
Well, the doctors are inclined to say that a schizophrenic may think he's a jolly nice person on Tuesday, and on Wednesday he can go out and murder somebody.
Yes, he's dissociated from what?
Reality.
Yes, that's what I wanted. Frank Muir, Saturnine.
Saturnine?
Mm-hmm.
That's good thing. It means applicable to people born under the sign of Saturn.
Yes.
Who are lumpish and stupid and cold and unwarmed and unresponsive.
Yes, I think that's
leaden.
That's what I wanted.
Well, it also means suffering from lead poisoning.
Quite right. Yes, the medical definition of Saturnine is suffering from lead poisoning. Yes. And born under Saturn, quite right. Gloomy, dull, glowering, phlegmatic, grave, and all the adjectives which Frank quite accurately used as well. 2 marks. Oh, Anne Scott James, your word is surrogate. S-U-R-R-O-G-A-T-E. Surrogate.
Well, now, if Frank Muir were to, which heaven forfend, get measles when we're next recording my word, and some inferior wit were to take over, he would be a surrogate wit.
He still get paid.
Is a surrogate unpaid? It's a stand-in, I never thought of it.
No, I think he probably does get paid, though I'm not certain if he gets paid the full fee.
Well, I think it is a stand-in.
Yes.
For a professional job.
Yes, I think that's good enough.
In the old days, when a husband couldn't produce a child, he often had somebody who... and that was known as in loco parentis.
I think the less we pursue that line, the better. Because this is somebody appointed by authority to act in place of another as a representative or stand-in. It means to ask for somebody in the place of. It's a Latin word. 2 marks. At this point, I give Frank and Denis a quotation for them to think about for their stories in the last round. And Frank, yours is, the game is up. And for you, Denis, a nightingale in the sycamore. Round 2 is a round of literary clues to pretty well-known works of literature. For 2 marks, I want to be told in what well-known work of literature the following appears or gets referred to. Beginning with Denis Norden. A villainous squire, 144 pairs of green spectacles, and a hijacking in a post-chaise.
I'm open to offers of help.
It must be Goldsmith.
Yes?
The grocer green spectacles.
It must be Goldsmith, the grocer, Green Spectacles.
That's a very good start.
It's the Vicar of Wakefield.
The Vicar of Wakefield, according to Anne. I was absolutely stumped on that.
Yes, if you can give him the squire's name, you'll get your full 2 marks.
I know the principal. Yes.
Oh, his same name as a chap who used to paint numerous frescoes at about the same time. Would that help you?
Painted Hall, you mean?
Yeah, Thorn something in the painted hall of Green.
That's right. You've got it between you.
Hill.
All right, yes, well, I think you've fought your way through. Yes, 2 marks. Vicar of Wakefield, published in 1766, was by Oliver Goldsmith. The villainous squire was Squire Thornhill. The green spectacles, believe it or not, were in exchange for a horse. And poor Sophia Primrose was forcibly carried off in a post-chaise and finally rescued by a chap called Mr. Birchall. 2 marks. And now, Dilys Powell, it's your turn. A halfwit, an anti-Popery riot, and a raven.
Well, that must be Dickens.
Yes?
It's Barnaby Rudge.
Yes. And the halfwit?
The halfwit was Barnaby Rudge.
Good enough. And the raven?
The raven was Raven. It was his pet.
Wasn't called Raven.
Wasn't it?
It was called Nevermore. He kept quoting it.
Now he's got
I can't remember.
a very short name, and it's more appropriate to a bulldog
Bulldog?
or a pair of pincers.
Snip?
No, they don't do that. I'm going to give you 1.5. What I was trying to get was grip. The raven in Dickens's Barnaby Rudge was the pet of poor Barnaby Rudge, who was a halfwit, and was called Grip. And the novel in general was told round about the anti-Popery riots, which were called the Gordon riots. 1.5. Now it's Frank Muir's turn. A doctor named Slop, a treatise
Dr. Slop, yes.
on noses, and an uncle who was wounded in the groin at the Battle of Namur.
Yes. These are characters from Tristram Shandy by Lawrence Sterne.
Yes.
One of the great sort of seminal, it's a terrible word there, isn't it? Seminal books of English humour.
Yeah.
And it sort of synthesized all the previous forms of humour of Rabelais and Cervantes, Don Quixote and so forth. And in this fantastic book, Tristram Shandy, which I do recommend you to sort of skip and plough and enjoy through, is all modern humour. It's a kind of send-up of a novel. And it was written in the 1860s and 70s. 17, yeah. 18th century, 17, yeah. Terrific.
That's fine. I think you've got... Would you like to try and remember, because this is a much more difficult one, who was supposed to have written the treatise on noses?
No, it was one of those...
very difficult ones.
Cod names.
That's right, it was.
Yes, no.
Just isn't essential. Well, he invented a character called Slaukenbergius,
yes,
who was supposed to have written the treatise on noses. Anyway, you know everything about Tristram Shandy and get your 2 marks with great ease. And that's to Anne Scott James. And a student of natural philosophy, the Arctic Circle, and an assortment of human bones.
Absolutely baffled.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yes.
The Arctic Circle.
Yes. The original Frankenstein.
Yes.
He chased him up. I think I've only ever seen, I think it was in a television version of it, the version where they chased the monster up to the Arctic Circle.
Yes,
I don't think any of the film versions have ever done that.
No, they didn't. No.
Have they? Dilys?
No, they haven't.
No.
Never. No.
I wonder why not. That'd be a hell of a
Yes,
scene, wouldn't
very
it?
good.
Yeah. The Mary Shelley.
Mary Shelley.
Yes, that's all right. And the bones, just sort of get that bit of the ingredients, right?
Well, it wasn't quite as Hammer Films made out in the original. It wasn't quite so technological, the reconstruction of the monster. It was simply a sort of do-it-yourself kit of human bones.
Absolutely right. Well done. 2 marks. Mary Shelley and all her chums had been telling ghost and horror stories, and they said, well, write this one down. And she did, and it became this very well-known novel, Frankenstein. Frankenstein was not the monster. This is what people mostly get wrong. He was a Genevan student, but he did learn the secret of imparting life into inanimate matter, and he went and dug up a lot of old bones in a churchyard, and he constructed the monster on the basis of these bones. And then he got away after having murdered Frankenstein's brother and his wife and chased him to the Arctic Circle. He was himself murdered by the monster, which then disappeared. Quite right, too. Well, now we have a round of difficult and paradoxical pronouncements, metaphors, some of them mixed, which are said or written by well-known people. And for 2 marks, I want you to guess at who said this or wrote it. Denis Norden, we begin with. You might as well fall flat on your face as lean over too far backwards. Good at dogs and women.
Thurber?
Yes.
Yes. Was it one of the little sort of conclusions he drew at the end of, what was it, Fables for Our Time?
I think it's that one, yes, I think that's right.
The line that always sticks in my mind of his, and I really can't explain why, is in a short story where he says, his wife Marion entered the room at that moment wearing dark glasses and showing her lower teeth.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
There was another beautiful line of Thurber's when he was interviewed on BBC Radio just before he died, and he said at one point in the interview, a woman's place is in the wrong.
In that same interview, there was one of the interviewers. Do you remember? There was one of the interviewers who said that he had been educated in France and had originally read Thurber in French, and it was only later in life that he'd come back to England and read him in English. And the funny thing was, he thought Thurber was funnier in the French. And Thurber says, that's been my trouble. I always lose a little in the original.
Well, again, a wealth of knowledge about Thurber, and 1.5 marks to Dilys. Dilys Powell, a verbal contract isn't worth the paper it's written on.
Include me out.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Sam Goldwyn.
Sam Goldwyn it is, and 2 marks. Frank Muir, I haven't been abroad so long that I almost speak English without an accent.
I haven't been abroad.
So long that I almost speak English without an accent.
A large rotund gentleman.
Yes.
The chap who did those lovely little short film. What's his name?
No. Short film.
Benchley.
That's what I wanted. That's what I wanted. Well done. Well-known wit, Robert Benchley. 2 marks, I think, this time.
He was the one who, when he went to Venice, cabled his travel agent. Streets flooded with water, please advise.
And now, Anne Scott James. The United States went to Costa Rica like a shark with a chequebook in one hand and a hangman's noose in the other.
Ideological, isn't it?
Yes.
It's fairly sort of modern, in fact, very modern, the last 15 years anyway. And the gentleman does not live very far away from Costa Rica.
Cortazar.
No, he's not primarily a writer.
Oh, well. Yeah. Everybody's not primarily a writer.
What's he doing on this program?
There's only Frank and me left.
He must be the president of the South American Republic.
That's right, you're getting that.
Castro?
Yes.
It's Castro.
Yes.
We've made it. Cuba. We've made it, have we not?
Cuba. Fidel Castro speaking unkindly about the United States. 2 marks. Well, now we come to the last round, and we go back to those quotations I gave Frank and Denis at the beginning of the program. And on this occasion, the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause of the audience here in the theatre. And Frank, your quotation was, "The game is up."
That is the perfect title for my book. I'm so grateful to you, Jack, for saying it. It's absolutely perfect. You see, I was thinking about writing a bestseller. It's cast, for instance, historically. You have to always have to be historical, really, and they've also got to be sort of vaguely connected with aristocracy. So my heroine is is a love child. He's always terribly sympathetic, you see. And her mother is Lady Caroline Mutton, who's a rather sort of older Lady Caroline Lamb. And the father is a sort of itinerant Grub Street writer. And he had a love affair with Lady Caroline Mutton, and his name was Thomas Tupper. That's a joke which will only be appreciated by farmers. But they have this child, and as is usual, she's put out to wet nurse, and eventually they persuade an innkeeper and his wife to adopt this child. And this innkeeper was Jabez Harp, who kept a little inn just round the back of Maiden Lane in the city of London. And she grew up a very gay, vivacious child. Extremely gay and extremely vivacious. And like all heroines of light love, she had an oval face. I can't really think of the alternative to an oval. We have a rectangular face, a parallelepipedian face, but she has an oval face and hazel eyes. I don't know what hazel eyes. Her eyes look like a nut. And ringlets, and all the time she's laughing and terribly jolly and fun. So the Harps decide to call her, Jabez one day says, every time the wind blows and we're sad, she just sings. So they call her Aeolian Harp. It's a beautiful name. And then she goes on the stage, you see, in my story. And she joined a company of a marvellous actor called George Frederick Cook. And she played Sheridan's comedies with George Frederick Cook and went on tour in the provinces. It was the first Cook's tour, actually. and she had this sort of unremitting gaiety, and when he said, we have only taken 4 and 6, it was, what matters, all the world's a stage, you know. And he took to drink, and he's actually one of the stage's most celebrated drunks was George Frederick Cook. But at the same time, there was a man in the company who was a nobleman who always wanted to be an actor called Lord Charles Grenville. And he was very much in love with her, but he couldn't stand this unremitting jollity. For 22 hours a day, she was happy and laughing and making little jokes. And eventually, although he loved her, and though he couldn't declare his passion, he went and joined the Navy. So they flung her out in the street. And she languishes there, this beautiful girl. And nobody will bother with her anymore. And she is really about to fling herself over what would be the embankment if the embankment had been built, which it hadn't been. When suddenly there is a man in front of her that she recognises. It is Lord Charles. This ending's a bit like Fanny Hill, but I'm cribbing it, you know. It is Lord Charles, and he's come back from the Navy stone deaf. He was on the Victory with about to go to Trafalgar, and Lord Nelson said to him, will you get Lieutenant Farr, who was a gunnery officer, and he thought he was working with a gun, so Lord Charles put his head down the front of the barrel and shouted Farr! And he went stone deaf, you see. So there he was on half pay, and there she is. So they get together, and she is the one he's always loved, and with her bright, unremitting chatter and this awful, glass-shattering laugh, he's the only man who can stand it because he's stone deaf. You see, now that's my story, which is absolutely super. Now, and I've got my nom de plume, which is Barbara Horseland. I want to be ahead of Barbara Cartland. And up to now, I've been stuck for a title for this thing. I was going to call it Aeolian Harp, the study of a Regency girl. And Jack gave me the title. I'm just going to call it simply The Gay Miss Harp.
Well, that's one heroine I hope I never meet. And we go on to Denis Norden. And if you remember, his line was a nightingale in the sycamore, which comes from Robert Louis Stevenson in Underwoods. Denis.
I wish I could remember the name of that pub. I can't even remember the area it was in. Somewhere around Ladbroke Grove or Shepherd's Bush. Somewhere. It's terribly annoying, actually. See, I've been asked to write an article in the series The Most Unforgettable Character I've Ever Met. I can't remember him. No, I mean, I can remember him. I'll never forget him. It's where he was that it'll come back to me. I know it was in a pub because I just bought us drink, you see, and I was astonished to see this elderly man at the other end of the bar holding an umbrella. Now, I mean, you giggle, what you think, what's astonishing about that? What was astonishing about that was that the umbrella was up. This old bloke was sitting at the end of the bar holding an open umbrella over himself. And what's more, it was one of those new type of umbrellas which come right down over your shoulders. You know the kinds, it's like sort of plastic dome of St. Paul's. You know? And there he was, sitting inside it. And this is a remarkable part, he was puffing at a pipe. Now, can you visualize what happens when a man smokes a pipe inside one of these transparent umbrellas? The whole upper half of his body simply disappears from view. The smoke just piled up inside the dome till eventually it was just like looking at a cumulus formation on top of a pair of grey flannel trousers. But that was nothing to what happened next. When the umbrella was completely full of smoke, he ducked out of it, then holding the umbrella so that none of the smoke escaped, he took from a carrier bag a large round plastic sheet with a little hole in the middle, and he slipped the hole over the handle of the umbrella. Then he gradually worked the plastic circle up the dome and sealed it to the ends of the umbrella spokes, you understand what I mean? So that all the smoke was now sealed inside this umbrella dome. And he put the whole thing on the floor and just sipped his beer as though nothing had happened, you see. Well, I don't know whether you could have kept quiet and just sat there, but I couldn't. I said, excuse me, sir, I wonder you tell me, what's your racket? To what purpose do you intend to put that umbrella full of smoke? And he was kind enough to explain. It all sort of fell into place. You see, the point of the whole thing was, many, many years ago, he'd been unfortunate enough to get married to one of those kind of women whose only response to any statement you make to her is some homely old saw or axiom, the kind of thing. If you were to rush in and say, oh darling, we've lost all our savings, the baby's fallen out of the pram, and the bathroom's just caught fire, what she'd say is something like, well, no use crying over spilt milk. Every cloud has a silver lining. Least said, soonest mended. 35 years I've lived with that, this old man said to me. It's been like cohabiting with the Oxford Book of English Quotation. He said, so the day I retired from work, I made a vow, sir. I vowed I would dedicate the rest of my life to finding answers to them proverbs of hers. He said, now this, and he patted the umbrella. He said, this is for the next time she comes out with, there's no smoke without fire. Soon as she says it, out I'll go to my shed, bring in the umbrella, shove it in her face and say, what about this then, eh? I said, I see. I said, well, do you have other sort of ammunition in that shed? He said, oh, I've got a few things, sir. There's a small round stone with a bit of moss on it. There's the 24 eggs that I did manage to teach my grandmother to suck. And they are all in one basket, I might add. He said, well, it's been nice talking to you, Gav. He said, I must be shoving off. I'm making the wife a birthday present at the moment, a little purse. I said, it'll be nice. It's pricey, though. You wouldn't credit the cost of those sows these days. And I watched him leave, the most unforgettable character that I've ever met anyway. But where that pub was it at Maida Vale in the Red Lion? No, it comes back. I've got it. It was exactly where that quotation of Robert Louis Stevenson indicated. At Notting Hill in the Sycamore.
And I hate to think how many husbands and or wives are going to try this new game out. But by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the story contest, and indeed he and Anne Scott James also win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. My Word. Game devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words. In the chair, Jack Longland.
We go straight into the first round, which tests their respective vocabularies. For 2 marks, what's the dictionary meaning of the following word? We begin with Frank now. Frank, supercilious.
Supercilious. Well, if a chap wanders around looking as though he's smelling a bad smell and as though he's a bit superior to other people, you say he has that silly ass look.
Yeah,
but if he wanders around looking though he's superior to everything, it's known as supercilious.
I want a slight change in external features or organs.
He raises his eyebrows.
Does he? How fascinating.
Frank is utterly right in what it means, haughtily contemptuous or terribly superior or overbearing. But it really originally meant with raised eyebrows. Cilium is an eyelid, and the bit that goes above the eyelid is called superciliosis. 2 marks. Anne Scott James, a different language. Ukase, U-K-A-S-E.
Is it Russian?
Yes.
It sounds very dictatorial.
It is.
It's an edict or
That's what I wanted.
Or an edict. Or an edict.
A Russian edict or pronunciamento, an arbitrary order which, though it hasn't gone through the law courts, has the force of law. It went back to the time of the Tsars. I believe it's still there with the Supreme Soviet today, subject to later ratification by the Supreme Soviet, whatever that may mean. 2 marks. Denis Norden, sesquipedalian, S-C-S-Q-U-I-P-E-D-A-L-I-A-N, sesquipedalian.
Well, that means what it sounds like, actually. It's rather sort of ponderous, heavy-footed, long-winded way of saying. When Winston Churchill said a terminological inexactitude because he didn't want to say the word lie, he was using a sesquipedalian word, or two sesquipedalian words.
Absolutely right, Dennis. That's good enough. Dilys Powell. Dialectic.
Dialectic, applied to materialism, by Marx.
It could quite easily be, yes, and it was.
Means lectic, something to do with words.
Yes.
Dia, across or through.
Yeah.
Arguing about. Argument, sort of intellectual discussions.
I think that's good enough.
I think so.
It's dialectic as a noun is logic, is the art of disputation, the investigation of truth by analysis, but it comes from the original Greek, which is dialectiki techni, which is the art of dialogue, argument, disputation. 2 marks, good enough. Well, at this point I give Denis and Frank a quotation to think about for their stories in that last round, and Denis Norden, yours is an infinite capacity for taking pains, and for you, Frank, hail to the blithe spirit, bird thou never wert. Well, now we do a quick flip through the pages of Palgrave's golden treasury of English poetry. 2 marks again. I want to know, to what poem does the following phrase belong? But more importantly, what is its first verse or stanza? In other words, I'm going to quote a line or part of a line which comes in the middle of the poem. Frank Muir again, and this is very suitable for him. We buried him darkly.
What's so suitable about that? Did we bury him darkly at dead of night, drumless and funereally noteless?
That's right. Yes, you carry on with that line, you'll do very well.
I think the compiler had the same sort of naughty schoolboy humour that I had, because we loved this couplet, didn't we?
Yes.
Which went, we buried him darkly by dead of night. The sods with bayonets we turned.
Absolutely right.
And the first verse is, of course, the not a drum was heard, not a funeral note. As to the ramparts, his body we harried.
His corpse.
Oh,
well, no,
his corpse.
Well, simple thing, yes.
Don't be fastidious.
Yeah, good enough, yes.
The burial of Sir John Moore.
Cries of author.
Well, it was written by one of these one-off chaps.
That's right.
One of these one-off clerics, like the Reverend John Bergen, who wrote A Rose Red City, half as old as time, and nothing else.
And nothing else, that's right.
This chap was Charles Wolfe, Reverend Charles Wolfe, late 18th century.
2 marks, brilliantly earned. This is the burial of Sir John Moore at Corunna by Charles Wolfe, and it starts, not a drum was heard, not a funeral note, as his course to the rampart we hurried, not a soldier discharged his farewell shot, or the grave where our hero be buried. Well, now, Anne Scott James, I think this is a bit easier. A flask of wine, a book of verse, and thou. Nothing personal intended.
Well, it is certainly from Fitzgerald's translation of Omar Khayyam.
Yes.
What's the first line, John?
I always remember a New Yorker cartoon of this. There used to be, I can't remember his name, a cartoonist in the New Yorker who used to draw these two marvellously gross people, husband and wife sort of thing. He always had his vest on, and she would always, had sort of curlers in. And do you remember them, Frank? They used to draw me very thick black lines. And he's waking, and it's early morning, and she's shaking him, and she's saying, "Awake for morn into the bowl of night, flung the stone that sets the stars to flight."
I thought this was Peter Arno, wasn't it? Wake up, you fool, it's our honeymoon or something, or our wedding day. Well, what about it now? Let's have the first line.
First line yet, have we?
"Awake for morn into the bowl of night, has flung the stone that sets the stars to flight."
That's right. Yes, that'll do. 2 marks. Denis Norden, you know, and chill with early showers.
Oh yeah. This is a golden treasure. I say golden treasure because there's a very mawkish poem by Thomas Hood.
Yeah.
And I remember we did that. It's about a deathbed, and there's a girl dying on the deathbed, and she's not blowing very well. And I can't remember that. It's 2 quatrains, and the first quatrain is about her breathing. And I know it had the word breast in it because that was a very big deal when you were in the first class. And then they had this thing. I remember we discussed it because we reckon it was going to come up one of those questions where they'd give it a line and they'd say discuss. We discussed it because it was an example. Thomas Hood always used to make puns, but they were generally in comic verse, and this was supposed to be sort of tragic verse. And we discussed whether puns could be set in the service of tragedy or not, because the second verse was something about when morning came dim and sad and chill with early showers, her quiet eyelids closed, she had a different morn from ours.
Then another morn.
Another morn from ours.
Oh, first class, Dennis.
It was a question. Yeah, I always remember that.
Thomas Hood, the deathbed, 2 marks. Now, Dilys, the very houses seem asleep.
That's Wordsworth.
Yes.
On Westminster Bridge.
Yes. And can you remember the first lines?
Earth has not nothing to show more fair.
Yes.
Any more fair?
No more.
This is Wordsworth's sonnet composed upon Westminster Bridge. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty, and so on to the end. Well, now we relax a bit and have a round of international nosh.
Oh.
National dishes that have become, we think, international. For 2 marks, I want members of the team to identify and at the same time give me the main ingredients of the following dishes. Frank Muir, yours is zabaglione, or it could be zabaglione, and I don't mind which you take.
Zabaglione. Or sabaglione. It's, if inaccurately made in the kitchen, is rather like drinking a glass of marine varnish, methylated spirits and custard. If properly made, it is a rather beautiful, light pudding consisting of mainly of egg yolks, beaten up, maybe egg whites as well, in a warm vessel with masala wine.
That's what I wanted. Absolutely right.
The colour is yellow because masala comes from the Canary Islands.
Well, 2 marks, Frank, but you add sugar to taste. We'll give you your 2. Anne Scott James, taramo salata.
Greek.
Yes.
Or Turkish.
Yes.
You get it in either place. Now, ingredients. Some cod roe.
Yes.
Some yogurt.
Yes.
Some garlic. Pound it all in a mortar. Or, in modern times, do it through a blender. Or, if you haven't got a blender, you push it through a sieve. And you serve it with, in the English version, with toast, but out there with a bit of rather dry old bread. And that's about the form.
Squeeze a lemon.
Squeeze lemon.
I'm going to give you 2.5 marks, so I'm going to come to you and have my Panama salata with
you. You must garnish it with sliced black olives. I'm sorry, I forgot.
True. Yes, absolutely. It couldn't be better.
You haven't got a sieve, use a tennis racket.
Oh, you coarse cook.
Well, I doubt whether Dennis is such an expert cook as Anne is, but so his is now gnocchi. G-N-O-C-C-H-I, gnocchi.
Gnocchi.
If you like.
I know it's that because I can tell you what it consists of. It consists practically wholly of calories. And the first time I ever had it was rather puzzling because the hostess lady said, she served this sort of, I think it was chicken unpronounceable. It was chicken cacciatura, I think it's called. And she said, would you like a gnocchi? And I hadn't the faintest idea what she was talking about. And you can't work it out from the sound either. It's a sort of dumpling, and it's semolina, actually.
Better? Yep.
Anne says that that's all you need to know. And truth is beauty, and beauty truth, and gnocchi is semolina, and that is all you need to know.
Just one final point, Dennis. Would you serve it dry or wet?
Depends on the mood.
I wouldn't serve it. The awful temptation is to throw it.
Essential information, absolutely accurate.
But serve two gnocchi unfaulted.
They're little dumplings. They can be made of flour or potato, but mainly, as Dennis Cartwright says, of semolina. They sometimes have cheese added to them, but they're served normally with a sauce. That's why I said my wet and dry. Anyway, too much. Now, Dilys Powell, couscous.
Couscous is a kind of Arabian dish.
Yes.
It's served, or possibly thrown, in North Africa.
Yes.
I have the faintest idea. I know.
Ingredients.
I don't know.
Yes, they serve it in Corsica.
Oh, well, you know.
In a restaurant halfway down the hill. You remember, it's based on stuff which looks like small rice, and it's a lie. It's not rice at all. It's some kind of awful sort of flour meal.
Yes, that's right.
Muck. And it's and the other stuff, the body of the meal, is sort of boiled up mutton and chicken, dashed on top in a very heavy brown sauce.
Oh, absolutely right. This is a splendid description, Frank. My culinary dictionary tells me this is ground hard wheat with lamb or chicken steamed over broth, sometimes with vegetables added, and as Dilys quite rightly says, it comes from North Africa, from an Arabic word, couscous, meaning to pound. Apparently you pound the wheat into a paste.
Costs about a pound, yes.
2 marks. Now we come to the last round. And we go back to those quotations I gave Dennis and Frank at the beginning of the program. And on this occasion, the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And if you remember, Denis Norden, your quotation was, an infinite capacity for taking pains.
Well, I have a theory about bits of homely folk wisdom like that one. What they spring from is pure jealousy. I mean, if you take that one, which the full line is, genius consists of an infinite capacity for taking pains, I bet that line only made the charts throughout the years because none of us can really bear the thought that geniuses not only do things better than we can do them, they do them much more easily. You see what I mean? We just can't take the idea of achievement without effort. So it's not really true that genius consists of an infinite capacity for taking pain. And there's lots of other ways in which you can prove that genius obviously doesn't consist of just a capacity for taking infinite pains. I mean, look at very early societies. In those days, the only outstanding men were those blokes who went round experimenting with wheat and corn and barley, trying to find ways of transforming them into staple foods for the community. You see, the qualifications for genius, where they were concerned, would be an infinite capacity for baking grains. Now, those same sort of alterations in this definition can be applied today. The qualifications for genius vary according to which area of endeavour you're referring to. I mean, if you take the theatre, for example, no matter how brilliant an actor is, he's never really accepted as a genius until we see him do at least 2 or 3 different versions of Hamlet. So surely that must be a case where genius consists of an infinite capacity for faking days. You see, it's all a question of where the man concerned is trying to make it. Take James Watt, for example, who's one of the greatest of our technological superstars. See, if you remember what he did, he looked at his mum's kettle boiling, he noted the steam issuing, and straight away he put every penny he had into backing the railway engine. So there's only one quality that defines his genius: an infinite capacity for staking trains. Which brings me to the only other authentic genius that I can claim personal acquaintanceship with, and that's Frank Herbert Muir. Now, Frank has many sterling qualities, which I would be the very first to deny, but not even his nearest and dearest, which are those 3 blooming Afghan hounds, not even they would claim that he is essentially a painstaking man. No, any success that he has had can be attributed to only one capacity, a capacity which on this particular program he has laboriously helped me to go some way towards acquiring, which is a slight facility in the matter of orally telling a story into which is incorporated certain phrases that twist and distort and play upon words. So that is the only genius conspiracy into which Frank has ever recruited me, an intimate complicity for talking puns.
Well, I'm glad Dennis didn't get further down the list than Frank Muir. We were all beginning to get a bit sort of embarrassed. We might have been next on the list. Anyway, back to Frank Muir now. And if you remember, his quotation was, "Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert."
Sitting there in my leather chair that evening, I was quietly rereading Blake. When I'm out of thoughts and worry about the world, I often pick up Blake. My favourite is Sexton Blake and the bloodstained putty knife, or the painter's revenge. But the phone rang, and there was this marvellous, sexy lady's voice on the phone, this sort of girl's voice. Said, "Hello, am I talking to Frank Muir?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I want to come and interview you. Have you one piece of advice you'd like to give the younger generation?" And I said, "Yes, indeed I have. Don't trust to spirit gum substitutes when you're acting in a play with a false beard." By heavens, I learnt my lesson. It was last Christmas in the church, in the village church. We were doing this nativity play, which my son Jamie had written with Nick the Vic. And they'd persuaded me, after a lot of trouble, to be Herod. So I rang through for the costume, and I rang through a good old reliable Nathan, and I said, "I want to play it rather Eastern, rather sort of, not just a sort of Roman Herod, but far, far more Palestinian and Arabic, a sort of Saracen Herod." And I said this over the phone, you see. But I was a fool, utter fool, really, because you should never do anything with fancy dress over the phone. And when it came, I opened it, and there was this sort of rather reddish, long wig, and this low-cut evening dress, very low cut. And I rang them up, and I said, this isn't at all. They said, that's what you asked for. I said, Saracen Herod? They said, you said Susan Hayward. Well, I couldn't go on in the village hall that evening. You see, that evening was our charity preview. The Senior Citizens Club, you see, were allowed in free while we did the dress rehearsal. It was all sort of frightfully frantic, and I managed to sort of knock together an Eastern Herod's costume, and I did the beard by cutting the heel off a pair of my wife's tights, which sort of fitted the chin. And then I combed the Afghan hounds and got a lot of rather gingery hair out, and I threaded that through the nylon of the heel of the tights. And I hadn't got any spirit gum, so I used a substitute, you see, which is where my great mistake. I used that sort of creamy rubber solution stuff. And stuck it on my chin. And by the time I got to my big speech, killed and butchered, tormented, and on the word tortured, I had to fling sideways, and I flung sideways, and my rotted beard detached itself from my chin and sailed out and landed in Mrs. Rumbold's lap. And Mrs. Rumbold was knitting at the time. She was knitting a garment for her grandson. And as I watched, I couldn't reach her. 9 seats in she was. I saw my beard being amalgamated in her knitting. And as I watched, being part of the pattern of a Fair Isle pixie hood. Well, of course, you know, the rest of the rehearsal was a travesty. The following morning, for the opening night, I cycled immediately back to Nathan's and got a proper outfit. And it was perfectly right on the opening night. I had a proper beard, and I glued it on with spirit gum. And it was beautiful. And that night, after the opening night, when I was taking my 17th or 18th bow, I can't remember, the audience had gone about 10 minutes earlier. I remember feeling this beard, and it was tight and jutting out, firm and fierce, like a ferret's hip in a high wind. And I thought to myself, there is no substitute for spirit gum. And I stood there bowing in this empty old Saxon church. I just gave a little paean of praise to the real gum of the theatre, and I said to thee, hail to thee, blithe spirit, beard thou never rot.
And by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the contest of the stories, and he and Dilys Powell also win this entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. My Word. A panel game devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words. In the chair, Jack Longland.
We go straight into the first round, which tests their vocabulary. For 2 marks, what's the dictionary meaning of these words? And we begin with Denis Norden. titubant. T-I-T for tit, U-B-A-N-T, titubant.
B-A-N-T?
Yes, yeah.
Well, B-A-N, banting, was the sort of 20s word for dieting or slimming or losing weight. So I suppose titubant would be flat-chested.
It's a lovely thought, Dennis. It's not getting very far.
No, it's not a word that I ever use with any confidence.
Does sound come into it at all? Is it a word of sound?
No, it's a word of movement rather than sound.
Tiptoeing about. A dancing word, is
Yes.
it?
Prancing and dancing and bobbing.
I'll give a word for that. It's reeling, staggering, stumbling, lurching.
Oh.
It can be tipsy, it can just be giddy pace, or it can be just sort of leaping and jumping around. So we're getting quite close.
Let me ask you a question, Jack.
Please.
Had you ever heard of this word before you had it put aside?
Yes, I had.
My friend Dilys knew it too.
Well, it's Dilys' turn. Dilys, your word is psychosomatic.
Psychosomatic is puts together the spirit and the body.
Yes.
And what's wrong with that?
And it's usually, it's generally used to refer to an illness which is produced not by being hit on the head with a hammer, but by some spiritual excitement or experience. Such as feeling rather nervous when you're a young thing and you get pimples.
Yeah?
Well, I've got that.
Oh, not a young thing, Frank.
I'm pimply, though.
2 marks. And it is Frank Muir's turn now, and your word, Frank, is a wowser. W-O-W-S-E-R, wowser.
Wowzer. I know this. Aussie.
Well,
Australian.
yes.
It's an Antipodean comstockist.
Yes, that would
Is
do.
it not?
Yep.
It's a very rare bird indeed, because it's
It doesn't swear.
it doesn't swear, it doesn't smoke, it doesn't drink. It's an Australian podnose.
Yes, fair
It's a
enough.
puritanical Aussie,
Absolutely right.
and there aren't many of them about.
I can't beat Frank's definition, so I won't elaborate on it, except to reassure that it is in Australia. And now it's Anne Scott James's turn. And yours is scrim, S-C-R-I-M.
I don't call that at all an interesting word. It doesn't inspire me.
It's
Got any help?
well, in the theatre,
Yes.
I believe the scrim is a kind of curtain which is it's almost like net. It's transparent. Well, it's like closely woven net, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yes. Yes, curtains particularly. All right, two marks. It's kind of thin canvas used as a lining for a curtain. It can be used in bookbinding, and it was used a good deal in camouflage in military sense in the last war. Well, at this point, I give Frank and Dennis a quotation to think about for their stories in the last round. And Frank, yours bursts into French and is chacun a son goût. And yours, Dennis, is in English. Nothing succeeds like success.
Go, I'm ready.
Well, you'll have to wait for a bit because I've got round 2 first. And this is a round of origins and derivations for 2 marks. How did the following words or phrases originate, and from what did they derive? And we begin again with Denis Norden. To be down in the dumps.
There's a... I think it was Mrs. Patrick Campbell. It was a rather nice bit of obituary that she did when some lady said to her, "I always buy a new hat when I'm down in the dumps." And she said, "I always wondered where you got them." I suppose it's where people dump things to feel cast down into the rubbish.
Cast down is an absolutely accurate shot. Dennis, leave that rubbish dump alone for a bit.
Is it some kind of hole in the ground or mine or?
No, to be cast down, I think is
into hell. Is it a specific place?
No. In Elizabethan times, a dump was a slow and mournful dance, suggesting gloom and the horrid plaintive tune that went with it. And this may have come from the verb which Dennis did in fact get right, which is a Middle English verb dumpen, meaning to cast down. But I think it's metaphorical rather than chucking yourself off a hill. 1.5. And now, Dilys Powell, your word is fan mail.
Which?
Fan mail.
Fan mail?
Origin.
Something I never get. It means a letter. It means letters from people who admire or claim to admire. And the word fan is very dubious and is sometimes taken to mean fanatic.
Oh, no.
I do? Mm-hmm. Well, it's letters from fanatical enthusiasts for the subject.
Absolutely right.
It's not.
Yes. Earlier than you think, I think, Dilys. This is in the early 1900s to start with. Letters from devotees, as you say, to a celebrity. 2 marks. And now, Frank Muir, to gird up one's loins.
Absolutely vital. It's biblical, isn't it?
Yes.
Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
You had to be sort of soldierly and gird your loins and
why?
be proud of them. And then there's a
but why?
Pride of loins. A gird was a length of rope which you wound round your middle.
But why?
And well, otherwise you had you were there like a nightie. I mean, your dress was loose and flowing. And to get on with any kind of active activity, such as a punch-up or something, first of all, you had to gather all this loose, wafting stuff in, or be shouted at.
Not be shouted at, but fall over, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, he was falling over because he failed to gird his loins that caused this chap to trip up.
Yep.
That's why the Pharisee was sad, you see. One of the few Old Testament puns we've ever had on this planet.
Well, to get the record a little straighter, he gets his 2 marks.
Well, you couldn't waft around with billowing things if you had anything active to do.
That's right. The tunic was too loose and not good as a walking dress, and therefore, when people left their homes, they tied a girdle around their tunic or dress in order that they didn't trip up, in order that they could move about easily. And otherwise their movements were inhibited. 2 marks. And now, Anne Scott James, marzipan.
What is marzipan? Let's come to this. It's paste. It's an almond paste.
Almond paste. That's a good start, yes. Sweet almond paste.
And Mars is obviously early English for an almond.
It was called something...
And pan is early English for paste.
It may be, but...
something you drank, ate...
No, I wouldn't do that. If you could give me the English equivalent, I'll give you your marks.
The English equivalent?
Yes. It isn't an English word, as I've given it to, marzipan.
Didn't it used to be called...
Castor oil.
Marchpane?
That's what I wanted.
Marchpane or march...
Yes.
Well done.
Between you, we've got it. 2 marks. It was known, this sweet almond paste, which I think is revolting, but other people like, known for centuries as marchpane, but from the 19th century onward, there became a great centre of producing this stuff. And it was in East Prussia, in Königsberg, which is now Kaliningrad, which was the world centre for this particular sweetmeat. And the German name was marzipan, and that replaced the English marchpane. Nobody quite knows what the origin of marchpane is, but I've tried.
It's a funny thing with marzipan, because people either love it or hate it.
Yes.
There's no in-between.
No in-betweens at all. No, I quite agree. Yeah.
It's funny how the lots of food names, the funny, the joke word is the real one.
Yes.
And the other one is the unreal one, like Welsh rabbit. is the popular word for it, and Welsh rarebit is another. And sparrowgrass was the original word, and asparagus is a later corruption.
Yeah. All right, we've gone to something quite different, because this is a round of household hints of some old but plausibly still valid remedies to solve various domestic difficulties. For 2 marks, what you deduce to be the household problem for which the following is the traditional remedy. And we begin again with Denis Norden. Boil them for 10 minutes in water to which has been added a muslin bag containing a lump of orris root. Orris is O-R-R-I-S, orris root.
That's for old pair girls who come in late. Well, they come here for the National Health. You show them, this is National Health. Get in that bowl of hot water and get with orris root. Who is orris root?
It is the foundation of face powder, but I don't know if there's some...
Yes, we're getting on the right track, I
Well,
think.
I'm right, in fact, that you can't make face powder without orris root, or you never do.
Yes, but the scent is the right bit, Anne, but it's them that I want. Boil them for 10 minutes in water to which has been added a muslin bag containing a lump of orris root.
But it's something that you want to give the scent of orris root. What did you say it smells of?
Face powder.
It smells of, come out smelling of face powder.
That's right.
It's a laundering thing.
Oh, I see.
Handkerchiefs.
Yes?
Your linen.
Oh, I see.
It's your handkerchiefs.
Your handkerchiefs.
And you're hoping they'll smell a little more precisely than that, Anne, but you've got there.
Smell of irises.
Nearly.
Smell of, well, not of lavender, because you'd boil them with lavender, presumably.
No.
Of herbs.
No, the blushing, modest.
Violet?
Yes, that's right.
Does it smell like violets?
Yes, so they say. If you want your handkerchiefs to smell like violets, and I don't know whether everybody does want their handkerchiefs to smell like violets, that's what you do. You have this lump of orris root and you boil them together with that in a bag. Dilys Powell, this is quite a different purpose. Dilys, I want you to make a small velvet bag and stuff it firmly with dry coffee grounds. Why would you do that?
I must have been a lunatic. Well, I don't know.
If you remember a time when things which are very frequently used weren't stainless.
It cleans things. It cleans teaspoons. Cleans the teaspoons.
It wouldn't do
Cleans the
that.
salt cellar.
No, it's...
Smaller and smaller. Cleans the egg spoon.
Cleans the eggs.
No, you're
But it's dry. It must dry.
You're saying, and you've got several of them in your mouth as you're doing so.
It cleans the needles.
Yeah, pins.
Pins.
Stuff the pins.
That's it. That's absolutely right. Oh, well.
Oh, the effort.
We 1.5. This is how to make a pin cushion in which pins and needles won't rust.
Really?
Yeah.
Don't believe it.
You don't have to believe it. You just have to know the answer. And now, Frank Muir. Make a simple trap by stuffing a small flower pot with dry moss and inverting it over a stake.
We still do that. You do it above the dahlias.
And now why, Frank?
Well, because it's supposed to creepy crawlies crawl up it.
Yes.
And die. Well, if they all sit in the moss rather than in your dahlias.
Any particular kind of creeper crawly?
Yes, earwigs.
Absolutely right. 2 marks straight away.
Everybody. In the 18th century, they used to do it on beds with bed bugs.
That I didn't know.
Yes, they used to have these things which attracted the bugs.
Must be very awkward sleeping among the flower pots. But 2 marks. Now, Anne Scott James, take a fresh bunch of stinging nettles and a spray of bruised elder and hang it up in the window.
Nice things, keeping flies and wasps and stinging things away.
Absolutely right. 2 marks straight away. Well, now we come to the last round. And so we go back to those quotations I gave Frank and Denis at the beginning of the programme. And on this occasion, the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And if you remember, Frank, your quotation is chacun a son goût, which is a traditional proverb.
Yes, it means to each his taste. Never more so is this true, I think, than in food. Is it not? I mean, really, food is very much a question of taste. chacun a son goût. This was borne home to me a couple of days ago when my wife was going off to lunch with a rich cousin who was taking her to some French restaurant. But I don't like that sort of food. And when my wife went off with her rich cousin to this restaurant, I decided to, come lunchtime, to cook myself the sort of food normally I cook my own food. You know, I can do this. I have usually a good luncheon of an inch and a half of cheddar and a banana. But I thought I'd really have a go and do myself eggs and bacon. So I got a book, which my wife doesn't know I've got, called Cooking for Bachelors. And it tells you how to do egg and bacon. And I got the non-stick frying pan, and it said butter's better for frying. So I got a packet of butter and took it out of its paper and put it in the frying pan and lit the thing, and it was smashing, you know. And after about 10 minutes, there was about a quart of this hot, bubbling butter in the thing, and lovely sort of blue smoke, which is terribly attractive. And I got this rasher of bacon and put it in this hot, bubbling, smoking stuff, and this extraordinary effect. After about 5 seconds, it was though there were about 70 tiny, invisible, miniature wasps were biting the back of my hand and my forehead. And this damn stuff was fighting back. It was spitting, like a hysterical cat. It was spitting this hot fat at me, you know, which is a bit worrying. So I thought, you know, I'm not going to get ruined, my hands. So I nipped next door and I got this chap's motor scooter. And it's got one of those plastic things up the front to save him from the wind. And I parked this in front of the gas cooker. And so I got a couple of eggs and put them on the top of the fridge and went over to look at my book. And when I came back, the eggs are gone. Apparently, top of the fridges aren't necessarily horizontal. And the things roll down and fall off. So I thought I'd put them on the draining board because there are ridges on the draining board of the sink. And they sort of roll even faster down there. So I got eggs number 5 and 6. And it said to tap them against the side of the pan, of the frying pan. I don't see why they tell you to do that, because if you do that, half the shell goes into the pan. And the other half of the shell and the egg drop into the hinterland of the cooker, underneath that sort of bowery bit. And it says another way of doing it is to crack it very lightly and gently urge both thumbs into the crack and pull slightly apart, and that will get the egg out without breaking it. Which it did. I must give the chap credit. It did that. Looking back, I think I should have done it over the pan. And I found that the easiest way, in fact, with eggs is to just crush them in your hands. The runny stuff, which isn't all that runny, it's quite sort of thick, seeps between the fingers. And you can hold the egg, and if you let that run into a bowl, you can make an omelette. So I whisked the thing up as indicated and put a slosh of milk in and some salt. Anyway, I finally finished, and it was curious. It was a kind of burnt and raw, and I put it beside this little tiny, like decayed dead oak leaf in autumn, which is my bacon. And the omelette was rather like a half-rotten black and yellow handbag. But I put it there, and I'd made it, and it was good, simple, plain food. And I enjoyed it. And my wife came back, and she said I had the most marvellous lunch, and I ended up with crêpe Suzette. And the waiter came beside me with a hospital trolley and the Bunsen burner, and she said, and this lovely thing, and he flamed it, and all the flames roared up, and I said, rubbish, that is. Rubbish. Ridiculous food. Mind you, it's everyone to his own taste. Everyone to his taste. But my taste is for picking away at a bit of fried eggshell from between the tooth. I had a most beautiful, simple lunch. Now, the food you're talking about, I said the French have an expression for that. That where the waiter slings on half a bottle of brandy, sets the whole table on fire, and you end up with a tiny bit of soggy mess. And so the French expression for that is chacun a son goût.
Well, I don't think that'll make the good food good. And we go on to Denis Norden. If you remember, his quotation was, "Nothing succeeds like success."
The week's good cause. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm appealing to you today on behalf of that selfless and dedicated body, the World Centre for Hangover Research. Now, I know that hangover is not one of those illnesses that people like to talk about publicly, but if the centre is to succeed in its noble work, then the first step must be to clear away some of the myths about hangover. In the first place, hangover is not infectious, nor can you pick it up off a bar stool seat. For that reason, its treatment does not require isolation of the patient, the barbarous practice of refusing to speak to him and making him get his own breakfast and sending the children off to stay with the grandparents. The sad fact of the matter, my friends, is that there is no known cure for hangover, that of all the illnesses, for the sufferer, few afflictions are more incapacitating, debilitating, and downright humiliating. On opening the eyes, the first sensation is an immediate and overwhelming conviction that one's body has been taken over by an alien life form. To the very extremities of one's nerve endings, all one is conscious of is the massive thud, thud, thud of the kitten walking across the carpet downstairs. Then, trying to dismiss the feeling that one's tongue is wearing a floor-length coat, one makes one's way to the bathroom, feeling extremely titubant, and one inspects one's face in the mirror. All right, you say, it's all very well harrowing us with these awful details, but what hope can you offer us? What research is being done to wipe out this distressing and widespread complaint? Well, my friends, mankind's only hope lies with the Hangover Research Centre. Here, a small band of dedicated boozers are labouring ceaselessly and selflessly every night from opening time onwards. They fill themselves with booze. Then, the following morning, gin leaking out of their ears and the temples throbbing like a schoolboy at a Swedish film, they sample every known antidote. And yet, no government subsidy attends their effort. It is all done by voluntary contributions. This despite the fact that if the hangover figures continue their upward spiral, it could mean the end of drinking as we know it. So therefore, my friends, may I appeal to you to give generously to this cause. I know you have many other calls upon your resources, but do consider this. There is nothing in the whole world that looks for outside assistance more desperately than an unwell drunk. Or as the proverb so succinctly abbreviates it, nothing seeks AIDS like sick souse.
I see an instinctive sympathy with that story. And by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the story, and that brings to the overall contest a rather remarkable result, and that is a draw.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. My Word. A panel game devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words. And here's your chairman, Jack Longland.
And we go straight into round one, which tests their respective vocabularies. For 2 marks, can you give me the dictionary meaning of the following words? And we begin with Frank Muir. Frank Muir, yours is turpitude. T-U-D-E.
Turpitude. Turpitude. Well, yes. Dick Turpin was not a hero. He was a very nasty, aggressive, villainous, violent kind of crook. And he had a kind of moral attitude.
Yeah.
And Dick Turpin's attitude is called turpitude. And it's a Greek word.
It isn't, it's Latin.
It says here. No, it's a Greek word. Turpos.
No. It won't do.
Did you mix with paint?
You get your...
We think that is my partner and I do this, and I think it is a Greek word.
You get your 3 marks for the right definition. It's wickedness, depravity, baseness, shameful character, etc. You're beyond redemption, I suppose, as Dick Turpin was. But I insist that it comes from a Latin word called turpis, which is base, and turpitudo, which is baseness. Anne Scott James, your word, and it is a single word in this context, is bee's wing. That is, put bees together with wings, and it's bee's wing.
I think it's a synonym for a butterfly kiss. I mean that seriously.
I'm not stinging it.
I gather it's not from your reaction.
No, it isn't. I suppose it might happen after you've had something to do with this, but... Let's
split it a different way. Bee swing. Now, when a bee enters, let us say, a plant like a lily, which has trembling anthers, and it swings upon them and searching for the honey.
You mean where the bee swings, there swing the
Exactly. Don't see how you can deny that. Otherwise, how about a clue?
Well,
it's bee's wing, isn't it?
That's right. You can drink it, but it would be ill-advised to do so.
Oh, the lees of stale claret.
No, shift from claret, and I'll give you some
Burgundy. Hock.
I'm going to give you two marks. It's port. It's in vintage port, and not tawny. It's the second crust, and it's little tiny scales of tartar. They form in the bottle after you've kept it for a long time, you have to be rather careful that it doesn't get into the glass because it's not much fun. And now, Denis Norden, and his word is limbo.
Oh, limbo is a Caribbean dance. It's a sort of reverse, sort of like a reverse high jump. You know, in the high jump, they keep putting the bar up and you have to go over it. In the limbo dance, they keep putting the bar down, you have to go under it.
Yeah, I'm bound to give you that, Dennis, and I'll give you your 3 marks, but can you give me another meaning of limbo?
Well, it was the sort of North Finchley of hell.
Yes. That's an absolutely perfect description. It was the place where in hell the heathen just and the unbaptized infants of Christians lived. They weren't themselves blameworthy, they got into the sort of wrong category. And therefore it can be, figuratively, any unsatisfactory place to which you're consigned to oblivion. 3 marks. The last in this round is to Dilys Powell. And Dilys, your word is hubris, Hubris.
Hubris. I do hope I'm not showing hubris and saying I believe I know. I do hope I'm not wrong. It means a special kind of pride.
Yeah.
And it was applied very often in the ancient Greek world to people who thought they knew better than the gods and didn't manage it. You were hubristic and you thought you were absolutely okay, and suddenly out of some cavern or other 200 serpents arrived to tell you to know better.
That's a very beautiful description of hubris. It was a kind of arrogance which tends to invite disaster, and it is almost the mainspring of Greek tragedy, isn't it? Yes, the higher you are up, the worse the fall. But at this point, I give Denis and Frank each a quotation to think about for their stories in the last round. And Denis, yours is, "How are the mighty fallen?" And for you, Frank, "A policeman's lot is not a happy one."
Happy one.
Well, now we get around to differences. 2 marks if you can tell me the precise difference in meaning and usage between the following. And we begin again with Frank Muir. Sardonic and ironic.
Well, they're both remarks you pass when you don't like something or somebody.
Yes?
They are marks of opprobrium. The origin of opprobrium
is not the subject of the present question.
is when brewers get the waddles or brewers droop. A sardonic remark is a bitter remark. Whilst we're on the subject of brewers, and an ironic remark is a remark which is opposite to the words that you use suggest. I mean, if there's a couple of chaps on a dance floor and they say they're going to dance with the first girl who comes out of the ladies, and the girl comes out and she's a very plain, ugly girl, one might say, well, there she is. I think her mother was frightened by Boris Karloff. That's a sardonic remark.
Yes,
not a very good sardonic remark, but a sardonic remark. If the other one said, here she is, Bridget Bardot.
That's it. Yeah.
That's an ironic remark.
Yes, all right, you'll get home to 3 marks. Again, only slight comment. Sardonic is probably a form of pessimism to start with. It finds relief in being scornful or bitter, as you quite rightly said, or mocking. I mean, melancholy jaques in As You Like, which is not a bad example. But ironic, it means a situational utterance that has a significance which is either unperceived at the time or certainly by the person involved. So that if you say this to the plain girl who thinks she's beautiful because of what you've said, it is, as you say, the opposite of what was intended. Well, now, Anne Scott James, yours is a bit different. Difference between an alligator and a crocodile.
Oh, that's difficult.
Oh, dear. Zoology I was never any good at.
What's the difference with shoes? About 20 quid, isn't it?
Is one hump or two?
Well, a crocodile is an Egyptian animal to which the ancient Egyptians used to throw their slaves.
Yes.
And an alligator, I think, inhabits North American waters, or American waters, and the slaves arrived too late. I think they just had to forage for themselves.
Yeah. Are they related, these two species?
Oh, yes, like anything they are. They all have...
They are, in fact, both the same word.
Huh?
Yep.
They're spelt differently.
Yes, they're very different indeed.
As Frank said, I hasten to add. You received a sardonic look.
Have you got anywhere near anything to offer?
No,
Try looking them in the teeth like a horse.
Look at horse and teeth to see its age, don't you?
Yes, not in this case.
Yes.
An alligator has 2 sets, and a crocodile has 3.
They're on the right tack. I'm going to give you 1.5. They both belong to a general species which is called Crocodilus, and the alligator is only a subspecies of this. It has the broader of the 2 snouts. That's why I said have a look at the nose. And as far as the teeth are concerned, the crocodile has teeth which fit into notches in its lower jaw, whereas the alligator has horrible teeth which fit into pits. This is the chief difference. But each word, in fact, means lizard. The el lagarto is Spanish for lizard, and crocodilos is Greek for lizard. So really they are the same species.
I think we should have a word of warning to overseas listeners. When Jack said, look into the teeth of the crocodile or alligator, don't get too near.
Otherwise you might fit into the pit yourself. I quite agree. Thank you, Frank.
Buenos noches.
Roughly in the same area of territory, we pass on to the one for Denis Norden, and yours, Denis, is tonsils and adenoids.
When you have your tonsils out, you get ice cream, but you don't when you have the other one. They are located in different places. Oh, this is a long time ago. Yes, before the coming of the railway.
Adenoids are in your nose.
Adenoids. Let's make you talk nasally. So adenoids are in your nose.
Yes.
And the doctor always looks down your throat for tonsils, because
Yes.
I know that from experience.
That's right. Well, that's absolutely right. And you get your 3 marks. These are fleshy pads of lymphoid tissue. The tonsils are those on either side of the throat at the root of the tongue, and the adenoids are at the back of the nose. And I'm reliably informed they're both made from adenine, which is one of the 4 bases in deoxyribonucleic acids. And I hope that does you all a lot of good. 3 marks. And now to Dilys Powell. Yours is picnic and asthenic. And I go on quickly to say picnic is spelled P-Y-K-N-I-C.
Well, picnic means rather thick set and squat.
Of what?
Usually of the human frame.
Yes.
And asthenic means rather kind of slight and slim, I think, doesn't it? Not like Darling Frank.
Yes, that's absolutely right. There are types of build in human beings, and picnic comes from the Greek pyknos, meaning thick. Short and stocky with bulky muscles, small hands and feet, short neck, round face, all this. Asthenic, tall, lean and narrow-bodied, like Frank and Denis.
So embarrassing.
Even more embarrassing to know what, in fact, it means originally in Greek, which means without strength. We now have a round of quite common surnames, which you can find in most telephone books. For 2 marks, why would you suppose the first bearers of the following surnames came to be so called?
Fletcher.
That's the sort of thing, yes. But in fact, Frank, yours is Chapman.
Oh, blow.
Don't look at Homer's Odyssey either.
Far be it from me to discuss Chapman, but a Fletcher is... A Chapman was a chap who sold chapbooks.
Yes. What were they?
Well, chapbooks were little tiny improving tracts which were sold for a penny at the end of the 18th century. He's a sort of dealer, a purveyor, and it comes from the word chap, which means dealing and purveying, and it's probably the same word as cheap in Cheapside.
That's right. 3 marks. Right. And Anne Scott James, Pettigrew.
Mr. Pettigrew is sort of predecessor to Mr. Short.
Yes.
He just grew a little bit. Well,
Put 3 marks at once. Absolutely dead accurate. It's the French words petit and gros, which means of little growth, or short. And now Denis Norden, Challoner, Challloner.
He sold challenge.
He did.
He did. Now don't press this, Jack. Well, we're still friends. Let's leave it at that. The Challoner was a man who sold challenge.
Well, where did they come from?
Ah, yes. Well,
The Channel Islands.
I'll go a bit further south. They're not far, but a little further south.
I haven't the faintest idea, Jack.
Oh,
It doesn't
shallow.
arouse even a tinkle.
Driving north to Calais, I think you come through it.
Sold Calais.
No, but
It's
south of that, no, Chalon.
Chalon. Chalon, it's been good to know you. What comes from Chalon?
Anything you drink?
No, more of an association with Whitney, I should have said.
Blankets.
Yeah. 2.5. It's Chalon-sur-Marne, and it's on the edge of the Champagne country.
Oh.
And the chaloun was a woolen blanket which was apparently first made in that town. And now, Dilys Powell, and your surname is Turnbull. Turnbull.
Well, he's a very brave man. He used to turn balls around.
No, absolutely right again.
Whichever handled asses was called an asser.
Anyway, your 3 marks, straight away. Well, now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave Denis and Frank at the beginning of the program. And on this occasion, the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And if you remember, Denis, your quotation is, "How are the mighty fallen," which comes from the Book of Samuel.
When you come right down to it, which is what I often have to do, being rather tall, we're none of us as clever as we sometimes consider ourselves to be. This was borne in upon me quite recently when I had a call from one of those commercial radio stations we've got round these parts. And a chap said to me, "Let me ask you something. Have you ever done a phone-in?" I said, "Well, no, actually I haven't. I ruined a couple of electric toasters, but..." No, I've never actually done a phone-in. They explained what it actually meant was a phone-in program, because they'd got this one that he was asking me to be the host of. The idea was that the listeners would be invited to ring in with their problems, and I would chat about the problem with them for a few minutes over the air. He said, "And then you, Denis, you'll solve the problem from your wealth of knowledge and breadth of experience." And I said, "Well, now that you brought the matter up of wealth and bread, how much are you actually..." He said, "Oh, it's very good, the pay is very good, because the program is one that we put out one of our peak listening periods at 3 o'clock. And I said, "Well, that sounds pretty good." And he said, "It is. He said, you'd be surprised how many people are awake at that time of the night." So in the wee small hours of the following Monday, I took my place at the microphone, and then suddenly a voice said, "Hello, my name is Arthur, and may I say how much I enjoy your program?" And I said, "Well, I haven't done one yet." And he said, "It's like this. My wife and me," he said, "we're professional ballroom dancers. Arthur Tozer and Ellen Botlock, former Southeast Area champions at Latin American and modern rock, and currently contenders for the All England trophy." He said, "You see, what our forte is, what has formerly always won us plaudits at every venue, is our lifts. The way I throw Ellen in the air and catch her on the downward plunge without losing one beat of the tempo or one sequin from her skirt." He said that's what gained us our title in 1960, and that's what we're relying on for our crack at this year's championship. "But you mean you haven't danced since 1960? Well, Ellen decided to put her career on one side for a time while she devoted herself to having children. I said, I see. Well, she must be a bit rusty by now, then. He says, it's not the rust I'm worrying about, it's the extra 4 stones she's got. He says, when it comes to the lifts now, he said, never mind sailing her above my head, I can't even get her airborne. He said, we've been practicing in the front room since 7 o'clock this evening. I haven't had her off the carpet yet. I said, well, when are the opening heats of the championship? He said, that's just it, this evening. I said, I think I see the problem. He said, well, I'll get her onto road work, of course, all day until dusk, but, well, unless you can provide me with some answer as how I can heave Ellen up, or at least knee-high, Gov, you understand? I doubt whether we'll do better than a bronze. He said, you can understand why I'm hanging on your every word, then. What do you suggest? As it's 3 o'clock in the morning, there's a brief pause while every cog in my brain spun till it felt it was red hot. Oh, would it be allowed, I wonder, if I phoned another phone-in program? I thought, no, they wouldn't stand for that. There was only one answer. Very quietly, I leaned forward and I wrenched the microphone lead out of its socket. And that was my first and last appearance as the host of a phone-in program. You see, had it been a problem about housing or family allowances or prison reform or even children's footwear, you know, anything like that, I could have been as glib as any of the other ones. But this problem, you talk about how are the mighty fallen. My very first question had left me just standing there, dumb and helpless. I mean, of all the problems to be faced with, how Arthur might heave Ellen.
Another promising career gone wrong. And now we go back to Frank, and if you remember, his quotation was from Gilbert's Pirates of Penzance, a policeman's lot is not a happy one.
And our constabulary duties to be done. And a policeman's lot is not a happy one. Anyway, I was going to tell you a story about when I was in my open-toe sandals and got my foot stuck in the down escalator. But when Dennis's story about when he had to give advice on the phone-in program reminded me of the time when I gave advice, which was about 5 weeks ago. I was a newspaper. I took up a newspaper column. And as I don't think my piece is in the paper, I'm very glad of this opportunity tonight to give immense reassurance to Ron Snaith over his problem. He lived at Chertsey, and he had this girlfriend, Flo, who sort of changed. He got engaged to her, and then she started off slim, and then she put on weight enormously, and her voice was the most frightful thing. I mean, she was an absolute harpy. He said harpiness is just a thing called flow. She used to shout at him and humiliate him, and he wanted to give her up. And he'd fallen in love with the policeman's daughter in the village. And he said, would I investigate the policeman's daughter, whose name was Lottie, and make sure that she wasn't a dreadful harpy like Flo was. The opportunity occurred only about 2 weeks ago. I was on my way back from a fancy dress ball in Norfolk, which was a Saturday night, and I'd gone as Cardinal Richelieu in scarlet robes and my head thrust up through a doily and a beard. And I was on the way back, driving myself back in the early hours on Sunday morning, and the car broke down. So I got a lift in a vehicle at this cafe I'd stopped at, this motorway cafe, and it was a vehicle which is working on the M25 in our village, and it was one of those things which has a platform, and on a lorry, and it has 2 girders on an elbow, and the chap in the cab pulls a lever, and the thing sort of straightens out and pushes the platform up, and they put new lights in lampposts and things. So in my cardinal's robes, I sat in that cage because the driver was there with his mate and a dog and a baby. But he said I could sit in this cage thing, and I drove home in that. And we're going through the village, and I suddenly thought, I saw a light on the policeman's house, and I thought maybe this is a chance to have a glimpse of Lottie, because it's early Sunday morning, and I could see what sort of girl she was. So we had a code that I gave a thump, 2 thumps, and they stopped the car, stopped this vehicle. So I gave thump, and I said, yeah. So I said, can you jack me up a bit to that window? I want to look in, you see. So he jacked me up, and she was in bed, and it was Lottie. Oh, she was beautiful, absolutely lovely. And she was reading. She was one of these girls who obviously woke up early and read. So I tapped on the window. She looked a bit startled, actually. Because it was the first floor, and there's this cardinal tapping on the window. So I said, and she opened the window and said, what do you want? I said, could I have a word? It's on behalf of Ron Snaith. Look, you better get in the cage thing with me so that we can talk. So she got out through the window, and I helped her into this cage thing. And it was a bit awkward, you know, and she fell over the edge in a thump. Whereupon the whole vehicle started off. And there she was in this baby doll nightie. And I was in my cardinal's robe. And it was about 7 o'clock on Sunday morning. So I thumped twice on the floor and got the vehicle to stop. Yes! I said, get us back, lads, get us back. So he said, right, we'll back up. So he backed up, you see, and there was this lighted window. So I tapped on the window and said, here you are. She said, it's not my house. And it wasn't. It was Mrs. Leatherbow, the village gossip. I thought to myself, this is it. This is the end of my career. You can see the headlines. Fake cardinal sex scandal shock. She opened the window and said, what's this? And this girl, the policeman's daughter, Lottie, who I didn't know, she just turned calmly to this woman and said, is there no privacy in this village? Can't a girl go to confession on a Sunday morning? So Ron Snaith, if you're listening tonight, I want to give you this immense reassurance about your girl. Whatever she is, our policeman's Lottie is not a harpy, Ron.
Well, that's a spotlight on life in deepest Surrey. And, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Frank Muir wins the story, and he and Dilys Powell as a team, they also win the entire contest, and this brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason, and presented by the BBC.